right, welcome to this week here where we're shifting. We've laid out sort of the early complex civilizations. We've gone across the globe, across the world here in world history. And now this next phase of the course, we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at empires. We're going to look at epics. So empires are the centralization of different regions, right? Just kind of shifting from early civilizations, complex societies, and cities to how these political units centralized, structured themselves, brought a more diverse group of people together under a central ruling territory. And then we're also, for the next few weeks, we're going to look at the concept of epics, how literature and stories also helped to do similar things, bring people together, sort of centralize culturally as well as politically. We're going to start in South Asia because fortunately here we have both empires. We'll look at here in this lecture the Mauryan, Kushan, and Gupta empires. They also have two great epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana here. And then also out of this, religions and stories comes, epics and empires, comes the ideas of religion. So we're also going to look at three important religions, two of which are sort of today seen as world religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, and then kind of a smaller religion that is specifically based in India, which is Jainism. So that's kind of what this week's going to look at, and we'll start with empires. So just kind of, again, sort of to move back to South Asia. Last time we left there, these Vedic groups had moved in. These Indo-Aryans. This is the Indus River. The Indus Valley civilization has collapsed. There are people who are still living over here, just not like a huge interconnected urban infrastructure. And in fact, the urban world shifts to the Ganges River. There's some explanations for that. One of them was kind of the increased use of iron was able to kind of, this is a much more jungly area than the Indus. Indus is pretty dry. So with these new technologies, they were able to clear more land, grow more food, and then the slow transition from these nomadic groups to more settled society. So here you can kind of see often around 500 BCE, it's called the Mahajanapadas, which are all of these names here are these sort of kingdoms that existed and their respective capital cities. So you really see sort of northern India kind of coming together, much more unified between kingdoms. Trade and connections between regions are working, and this is really this epic age is really the stories of these kingdoms, and as they try to kind of coalesce their power and obviously come into contact with different regions. So a lot of the epics, which will be composed a little bit later, are kind of looking back at this earlier phase of history. Within one of the important parts, and this is why religion is tied into this, is that in this new urbanization period, you have this formation of two sort of belief systems, both sort of centralized. We'll get back into this religion from the Vedas. One of those is typically called orthodox, which means they sort of keep with the Vedic values. They perpetuated Vedic ideals. We get into those a little bit later. And this orthodox religion is called Hinduism, which we'll talk about later. And then there's some people who reject a lot of the underlying essence of the Vedas, particularly the Varna systems, concepts of existence, kind of challenge that, come up with these new ideas, go against the grain, if you will. And that's called heterodox, different beliefs. And those are what Buddhism and Jainism comes from. So here's Shiva, very sort of Vedic world. Here's the Buddha here. So within this age of empires is also religion plays a big role in the formation of these new societies. So the first empire that emerges in South Asia is the Mauryan Empire. It was centered here right along the Ganges. Their capital is Pataliputra over here. And then they expanded all the way at the height of their empire. They controlled most of what is now India, Pakistan, all the way up to Afghanistan. The founder of this is a guy named Chandragupta Maurya. He supposedly kind of spent some time up in Taxila, which is also where, we'll get into this a little bit later, sort of the Greek influence up here in Gandhara. And then slowly sort of expanded out to control most of this world. We do actually have records of the Greeks. This envoy, Megasthenes, wrote this book called Ithaca, which talks about, from the Greek perspective, gives us some insights into the Mauryan Empire and Chandragupta Maurya. one of the major texts we also have of this period is the Arthashastra, which was attributed to the Chandragupta Maurya's advisor Kautilya, and this is like the first book of statecraft in India. Right? The one quote here: "The king who is bent on doing good will to all people will enjoy the earth unopposed." But it's really a lot about how, I mean, it's just a handbook on how to create functioning states, how to centralize, how to deal with enemies, kind of the idea of the enemy is your friend. So you kind of get these concentric circles of different groups and you make alliances, how to manage resources, how to set up administrative structures, what ministers are there, and all of that. So we see within the Mauryan Empire this idea of centralized administrative structures that can control all of these different kingdoms under one ruler, the Mauryan rulers. The successor of Chandragupta Maurya is this guy named Ashoka, who's also a very interesting figure. He kind of finishes this area of Kalinga here, was sort of one of the last places that was left unconquered by Chandragupta Maurya. He conquers this, and then he leaves a couple inscriptions over here, and he talks about how, because of this big war, he's going to convert to Buddhism, right? And he's going to get rid of military expansion, instead sort of rule benevolently. And we have, this is the beginning of writing in India, that these Ashokan edicts are written in this language, or the language is Prakrit, sort of similar to simplified Sanskrit. We have the new writing system of Brahmi, and this writing system of Brahmi is related to the contemporary writing system of Hindi, Devanagari. So you see the first writing systems introduced into India during this period, which gives us a lot of great primary sources into the Mauryan world. And one of the things that we have from the Mauryans, so we kind of know a lot about them, is that Ashoka started going around and writing all these edicts, kind of these edicts about what he wants his empire to look like. Some of them were pillars, some of them were rocks. Some were there's 14 major edicts that were on these rocks, these square ones. So these contain all the 14 edicts. We'll talk about those in a second. There's some smaller minor rock edicts here that are more sort of like centralized. They actually talk to the people from the region. But really, these really profess sort of concern for the subjects. They're not, hey, I've come and conquered you, bow down to me. They're much more sort of how Ashoka envisions his empire to flourish. Stresses ethics, adherence to dharma. So we'll talk about dharma as a concept when we get back to Hinduism and religion a little bit, and also this idea of religious tolerance, that there's different religions around, and everyone should respect those. And here's a good example. So here's one of the major rock edicts, and you can see when they say a rock edict, like literally, it's just written on the rocks. It's over in Gujarat, India. And so each one, you can see the lines here, and each one of these, there's 14 of these edicts, and I've just kind of pulled out a couple that exemplify what Ashoka was trying to say. The third edict says that it's good to be obedient to one's mother and father, friends and relatives, to be generous to Brahmins and Shramana. So these are the two. Brahmins would be the sort of the orthodox Hindu priests, where the Shramanas would be these sort of heterodox Buddhist Jain priests. It is good to not kill living beings. It is good not to only spend little, right, but to own the minimum of property. So just kind of be a good person, right? So this isn't, I'm the king, I'm going to conquer you and destroy you. It's, hey, let's all work together here. And then a very famous edict here, 10th edict, Ashoka sets no great store by fame or glory, except in that his people may obey Dharma, or Dharma. And Dharma, we'll see when we get into Hinduism, is this idea of duties, how people are supposed to behave. It's a very big idea as we get into the epics as well. So he's really saying here that, I'm not here, right? I don't want to just be remembered because I was a great ruler and glory and battle, right? I want people to remember me because of how the world worked, and how we were able to sort of bring everyone together. So they're very interesting. Ashoka is very seen as one of these first rulers that transitioned away from sort of ruling through sword, but ruling instead with words. And then after Ashoka dies, the Mauryan Empire collapses. These kingdoms fall back for the next about 200 years, sort of smaller kingdoms rise. And the next kingdom to come about is this, or empire, is the Kushan Empire, which, as you can see here, was one of the largest empires in the ancient world, controlling everything up here in what is now sort of Afghanistan, Central Asia, all the way over what is Gandhara, all the way into northern India. They had two sort of capitals, one Mathura, another one up here in sort of northern up in the Indus. So the kind of the areas of the Indus also get incorporated in there. Who are the Kushans? Kushans were originally these again, another nomadic group. So we're starting to see this pattern of nomadic groups. They actually settled in this area. They were kicked out of. They got in a sort of a battle with some other nomads up here in Central Asia. Then they settled up here in what is called Bactria, and it's a very interesting part. This is one of the early when the Greek Empire expanded out. They set up a sort of a satellite empire here. The Yuezhi, as they're called, the forefathers of the Kushans, settled here and then became sort of established a small kingdom here alongside the Greco-Bactrians. And then ultimately, about 50 CE, they cross over into Gandhara and then ultimately move into northern India, set up their power base there. Some things about the Kushans of why they're important. They ruled for about 300 years over this region, but we also see what's interesting to the Kushans is this is sort of the first depictions of imperial art and religious figures. So this is this explosion of sculpture. A lot of these play into particularly religious figures. This is the first time we have examples of the Buddha. Before that, and we'll talk about this with Buddhism, they have things called aniconic representations, maybe like a footprint or an empty throne, which stood for the Buddha. In the Kushan period, in Mathura, sort of northern India, and particularly in Gandhara, you have these new images of the Buddha here. And in fact, Gandhara is here, and you can kind of see these looks sort of a little Western. That there's influence in Gandhara, it's just sort of northwest South Asia, with these Greek rulers. So maybe these art, this mixture of peoples were going there. Here's another big. This is a statue of actually Kanishka here. It's actually written across the front here, the name of Kanishka. His head's gone, but we can kind of see his figure. And again, you'll notice here these big long robes. This is obviously India is a very hot place. So these boots and these robes kind of show us that, these were originally nomadic groups that came in. And with art is also a good indicator of prosperity. People there's elites that are paying, sponsoring, giving patronage to these different religions. And the religions themselves, this is a period where Buddhism and Jainism and Hinduism starts to kind of come together, build monasteries, and to put those things in those monasteries and to support the monks. People donated things. And here we have the Jains, which we'll get into a little bit later in the religion section. But you can see they created art alongside the Buddhists. And then early representations of Hinduism. Here's the sort of phallic Shiva of the phallic representation of a linga. And then some other, this is another Kubera, I think, the god of wealth. So we see these early representations of art within the Kushana period, which reflects this very prosperous world which the Kushans ruled over. And with the next section here, we'll look a little bit at the trade connections that flourished during this period.